Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Dr. Mike. Today I ran across a article that was put out by the Harvard Health Publishing School. So this article came out by Harvard Health Publishing, Harvard Medical School. Very well respected. And it really caught my eye because they talked about these are the 5 foods and drink fads you can skip. And if you know me, I'm all about looking at these dietary fads because there's a lot of them out there. So it caught my attention. So I read the article, and it starts off says trendy isn't necessarily healthy. Absolutely correct. And they had a picture of coconut oil and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I get it. Blah blah blah. And then as I start to scroll down on this article, I looked at number one, vitamin enhanced water. Totally in agreement with. There's a lot of these waters out there, these brands that are promoting vitamin enhanced water. And my biggest my biggest concern, or my biggest question, I should say, all the time was, well, what about the fat soluble vitamins? How are they going to do in these waters? And that you'll do well with the water soluble, but what about the fat soluble? So yeah, I get that. Second one was coconut oil. And yeah, I see a lot of people go overboard with the claims on coconut oil and all, being the be all and end all. And some people take in really too much coconut oil. I'm agreement with that. But when I looked at the recommendation, I had to raise an eyebrow to that. And it says stick to canola oil for cooking and olive oil for cooking. Now, I'm not a big fan of canola oil for many reasons, and one of them has to do with how much omega-6 fatty acids we have in our diet versus omega-3s. Now, canola oil in and of itself does have healthful properties. Don't get me wrong on that. But it's all about the balance between omega-6s and omega-3s. And then now you start putting in the idea of cooking the oil, especially canola and olive oil. Now, every single oil has a smoke point. And when you exceed that smoke point, you then will change the chemical structure of these oils and you start turning it into a trans fat. That's when we start getting into way bigger issues. And there's studies that show how the ratios of omega sixes to omega threes, because that's the biggest thing we're looking at here is the ratios between the two. Not necessarily just looking at it in isolation. And then we have how these inflammatory issues are affecting younger people. And I'm going to do another video because I read there's a big study that came out that's talking about how mental disorders are affecting the youth. So we got to talk about that. And then you have the different health implications of high dietary omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids. And we got everything from cardiovascular disease to obesity to IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, RA, Alzheimer's disease. All of these things are being caused by chronic inflammation. And this goes down to an imbalance between omega 6s and omega 3s. So, Harvard, I disagree with you on this one. I agree with you on the whole idea behind coconut oil and people going overboard with that, but I don't agree with your recommendation of canola and olive oils for cooking. It's about the balance between your omega 6s and omega 3s. And you can also get a lab test that will measure that. And you should have a ratio anywhere between 4 to 1 to 7 to 1 of omega 3s to omega 6s. It's usually the safe recommendation. Now, the third one is a very common topic that people talk about, the gluten free movement. Yeah, I agree with that. But they're basically saying that you don't need to eat gluten free foods. Now, I'm also, I'm on the side where I say you can't just eliminate all of gluten. I mean, if you could, but that's a very difficult task at hand, right? Because it's in almost everything. So it's minimizing as much as you can. And if you know that something has gluten in it, like for example, whole wheat in and of itself, we got to be decreasing that. And it's not necessarily just because of the gluten, right? It's all about, let me pull this up for you guys. It's about the crops being sprayed with glyphosate or Roundup. And what's happening here is that glyphosate is what's causing damage to the intestinal lining, which is then allowing gluten to become way more of an irritant to your gastrointestinal system. Okay, that's one of the big things that's going on here. And then there's another study that came out here, and it says it talks about how intestinal cell damage caused by sensitivity to wheat in the absence of celiac disease. And this is what a lot of people, and whenever you talk to medical researchers, whenever they're talking about gluten sensitivity, they're talking about celiac disease. But this study says these findings reveal a state of systemic immune activation in conjunction with a compromised intestinal epithelium affecting a subset of individuals who experience sensitivity to wheat in the absence of celiac disease. Basically saying that there was a reaction in people who don't necessarily have celiac disease. And there's tons of different studies that go on to show how gluten is impacting the gut microbiome, which, in my opinion, is actually even more important than the gut barrier, how it's being affected with leaky gut and all that stuff. It's really looking at how gluten is affecting the gut microbiome. So, Harvard, again, I disagree with you on this. Um, Wait, I do agree with this part though, when they say, hey, they recommend keeping a food diary to record what you eat. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, you should be doing that and then looking at the things that you're reacting to. Um, Number four, I don't know. I mean, this is a common thing on, whenever you start talking about this. I mean, you can look at Dr. Gundry's book and you start talking about lectins and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't disagree with what they're saying here. I'm not in agreement. I'm kind of neutral on this one. And then the last one was mushroom infused drinks. Now, this is another fad that's going on. Yeah, I see it a lot. I use mushroom infused drinks. I've seen really good ones. I've seen really bad ones on the market. But what I don't like on there's a couple of things I don't like on what they write in this article. I hate when these articles come out and then whenever they talk about any type of nutritional supplementation, they talk about the FDA or not being regulated by the FDA, not FDA approved. And you know what? The FDA deals with drugs. They make sure that the drugs that are on the market are quote unquote safe, and they have nothing to do with nutritional supplements. So, in the general public's eye, it looks bad, right? Whenever it says, "Oh, it's not approved by whatever," because in our mind, we like to be approved. So, whenever these people write things like this, I don't like how they use that, because in actuality, a lot of dietary supplement makers out there, they go through very stringent processes to make sure that their extraction methods and their production methods are very clean. So I don't agree with what how they use this. And then the second part is that they talk about studies here. And they says there are small studies here or there's lack of studies, you know, surrounding these things. And they couldn't be more just far off from the truth because if you do a search on PubMed, I mean, I just looked up cordyceps for one. I mean, there's 1,400 different studies on cordyceps here. And you can type in any of the medicinal mushrooms, like chaga and all these different things. But I just looked at cordyceps and let's look at the different studies that was done. And this study here shows a reduction in the growth of non small cell lung cancer lines by cordyceps. Another one is the effect of cordyceps on exercise performance. And this one showed that this pilot study suggests that supplementation with cordyceps improves exercise performance and might contribute to wellness in healthy older subjects. Then you look at this study, it says the anti hyperglycemic activity of cordyceps in diabetic rats. And this is showing how well cordyceps does at regulating metabolic syndrome and diabetes. So for them to say right off the bat that there are not enough studies, um, and this is another thing that whenever people talk about studies, it's like, well, the studies are limited to petri dishes or lab animals. Yeah, because I mean, most of the studies that's being done is not being done on humans because of ethical issues that people have with that. I mean, you look at the majority of studies out there. One, a lot of the pharmaceutical studies, the data is skewed, and two, clinical trials. I mean, some of the clinical trials and research studies on human subjects are very minimal. I mean, you look at the case like Vioxx. Vioxx hit the market. It was FDA approved, and look how many, I mean, issues arose. I mean, there are numerous deaths because of that, and it was approved by the FDA, by the way. So, Harvard Medical School. I don't know if I can agree with you on this letter. Um, yeah, sorry, I got to call you guys out on that. I mean, I understand what you're trying to say. I do agree with you guys on fads, and people can go overboard with fads. I'm all about looking at the biochemistry of it all and really diving into it. But the general public is going to read this and they are not going to be making the right decisions because Harvard Medical School is a very trusted resource. So we got to do a little bit better on this. All right, it's Dr. Mike from Triple Play Podcast. Um, hope this helps. Aloha.